GamingBolt presents 15 worst PlayStation exclusive games Sony wants you to forget. PlayStation's strong and impressive lineup of exclusives is probably the biggest edge it has over its direct competition, a fact that's been true for as long as anyone can remember. Over the years, PlayStation owners have been treated to a variety of exclusives, including first-party greats like Crash Bandicoot, God of War, Uncharted, and The Last of Us, as well as excellent third-party exclusives like Final Fantasy, Metal Gear Solid, both of which used to be exclusive to the PlayStation until not that long ago, Persona, and more. But much like everything else in the world, it's not all good. Even PlayStation's list of exclusive games follows the law of averages. To that end, in this feature, we're going to take a look at 15 of the worst PlayStation exclusives over the years. Note that when we say PlayStation exclusive, we don't necessarily mean that these games are made by Sony. Several games on this list will be first-party titles, while several others will be third-party exclusives. With that out of the way, let's jump right in. HAZE, PS3. HAZE. A game that generated insane amounts of hype in its build-up to its launch, to the point where many even touted it as a PS3 Halo killer. The result was far from what most people expected. HAZE was, when all was said and done, not only aggressively uninspired and unimaginative, it was just downright a poor game. It had a terrible plot, stupid AI, and a serious lack of meaningful content. In the end, the only thing this Halo killer was able to kill was a half dozen hours of your time that you're never going to get back. Lair, PS3. Just like HAZE, Lair was one of the PS3's most highly anticipated exclusives in the earliest stages of its life cycle, but just like HAZE, it was a massive disappointment. On paper, there was no way this game could have been anything but amazing. A game that has you playing as a dragon riding knight with visuals that at the time promised to be unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. How does one manage to mess up something like that so royally? Well, by cramming the game full of unnecessary and extremely poorly implemented motion controls. That's how. KNACK, PS4. With KNACK, Sony wanted to send out the message that PlayStation was not just catering to the hardcore. For those who wanted a fairly simple, accessible, yet enjoyable game, KNACK was supposed to be the answer. Except it wasn't. It was too simple, to the point of lacking any sort of depth, and while on paper it presented some interesting ideas, it never really capitalized on them at all. Don't believe the memes, people. KNACK is not the greatest game of all time. KNACK 2 is. Ridge Racer, PS Vita. Ridge Racer on the PS Vita really has no right to exist. This is not a game, this is a tech demo, and that too a very bare bones one. When it first launched, its total lack of content was astonishing, with the game practically forcing players to purchase DLC if they wanted more than just a handful of tracks and cars, while even the stuff that was in the game was hardly even average at best. There was no progression system at all, while the online racing was also horribly unbalanced. Twisted Metal 3, PS1. Given how well its predecessors and successors did, it's shocking that we have to mention Twisted Metal 3 in a list like this one, but unfortunately, it's completely justified. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this game's only positive was its excellent soundtrack. Beyond that, everything just wasn't up to mark. Its stages were poorly designed, while its physics were painfully bad as well, and given the fact that this is a car combat game, having bad physics is the last thing it would have wanted. Last Rebellion, PS3. Last Rebellion was bad. Very bad. Very, very bad. It utterly failed in almost every single department. It had a laughably bad plot, ridiculously boring combat, very linear progression, and was riddled with unfair and frustrating difficulty spikes. It was so bad, in fact, that after its release, the president of NIS literally said in as many words that he was really sorry for our customers because we released that title. Bravo Team, PS4. If Bravo Team was nothing but a tech demo to show off what VR could do for games in the near future, it would have been fine. Fine in a way that people don't particularly care for it, but don't really mind it all that much either. And in many ways, that was exactly what it was, except it was released as a proper game, which it absolutely wasn't. Let's not even talk about the visuals that looked thoroughly outdated, or the narrative, which may have been beside the point but was still unbelievably unimaginative. The game was just boring. It had the most cursory level design and shooting mechanics, with some poorly executed stealth thrown into the mix, and that was it. Basement Crawl, PS4. Basement Crawl is quite accurately named because once you've played it, you want to crawl into your basement and then kill yourself. It wasn't broken, but really that's about all the praise this game deserves, and all the praise it has ever gotten and will ever get. Basement Crawl is the most bare-bones, unoriginal game you will ever play, though we seriously don't recommend playing it. If you have that much time on your hands and hatred for yourself, do something less sad, like, I don't know, play KNACK instead. Except, maybe don't do that either. Mortal Kombat Special Forces, PS1. Here's something no one should ever say. Hey, look at this excellent, universally praised fighting game. Let's take it and turn it into something that has nothing at all to do with what it's supposed to be. Isn't that a wonderful idea? Except someone did say that, which was inexplicably followed by someone saying, hell yeah, which was in turn, for some reason, followed by not a single person telling them, maybe this isn't a good idea. And you know what? It wasn't. Mortal Kombat Special Forces is a horrible game. Midway had to temporarily put the series on hold because of it. This was the darkest timeline. Gangs of London, PSP. Being a GTA clone really shouldn't be that hard, you know? The blueprint is right there for everyone to follow, so even if developers can't make an excellent game, they can at least make a decent one. Sadly, Gangs of London was pretty bad. The amount of repetition in this game was ridiculous. Basically, if you've done one mission, you've done them all. An exaggeration, of course, but you get the point. Even the most fundamental mechanics, driving and shooting, were broken, so even messing around in the world was no fun. Oh, and let's not forget that this was a pretty violent, M-rated game sporting strong and explicit language that for some reason chose to beep out a lot of its curse words. Let's never forget that. It would be like us mentioning Uncharted 2 and The Last of Us as some of the PlayStation's best exclusives ever in a list about bad exclusives. Just cuz. Little Deviants, PS Vita. To be fair, Little Deviants is probably among the better games on this list, but that should tell you less about the quality of Little Deviants itself and more about all of the other games on this list. Because while Little Deviants isn't a fundamentally broken or offensively bad game, like many others here are, it's still at the tail end of PlayStation's lineup of exclusives. This was basically a collection of minigames, and though some of them made use of the Vita's mini input methods rather well, the game would have been better off being a free-to-play title or a tech demo or a very, very cheap game. Except, it was none of those. PlayStation Move Ape Escape, PS3. Wait, no. This was the darkest timeline. The timeline of motion controls, of crappy shovelware dominating the market. The timeline of the Wii's worst of the worst, the Kinect and the PlayStation Move. And what's the worst thing the PS Move ever offered up? Well, Ape Escape may not be the worst. That would be underselling just how bad the Move could be when it wanted to, but it's certainly up or down there. It's not even that the game was extremely shallow and inane, which it was also thoroughly unentertaining. Ape Escape Academy, PSP. No, scratch that. This was the darkest timeline. Sony had relegated most of its trash can ideas to the Ape Escape series long before the PS Move ever came out, and this game is the perfect illustration of that. Academy was a collection of minigames, and to be fair, they were praised a little bit for their variation. Unfortunately though, while they were varied, the minigames were also riddled with poor controls, and ultimately, Ape Escape Academy turned out to be a very forgettable experience. Kung Fu Rider, PS3. Kung Fu Rider was one of Sony's launch titles for the PS Move, and that should clue you into the kind of game it turned out to be. Its premise hinted at weird and bizarrely enjoyable action, but in the end it was just bizarre. The game was bogged down by bad physics, lousy animations, unresponsive controls, a slew of technical glitches, and a serious lack of content. Most egregious of all of its sins was the fact that it actually retailed at a price of $40. iToy, Operation Spy, PS2. You know what? Screw it. They're all the darkest timeline. Before Sony shoved the PS Move down our throats, they came up with the iToy, and in many ways, it was worse. To be fair, Operation Spy had some interesting ideas on how to make use of what at the time was unique technology, but it never really put those ideas to use. The game was severely lacking in content, and sadly enough, most of it was rather uninteresting and not very enjoyable. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.